But I want to talk a little bit about the idea of burnout today in our time together. This is something that we're encountering a lot here at the CMDA. Our members, as you can imagine, having come through the pandemic. Without the pandemic, it's been rough on healthcare professionals, but with the addition of the pandemic and the stress loads and the workloads, it's been really challenging. And we've learned a lot, and we're trying to provide as many resources as we can in our center here for the Center for Wellbeing. But one day I was interacting with some of our members, and I got this idea of putting together a talk on learning the ropes of leadership. What does it mean to learn the ropes? Well, when you're learning the ropes of a job, you're learning the particular roles, the particular details about a particular job. And so when I came back to CMDA 2 years ago, I had been a part of the CMDA. I've been connected. I've been a speaker with the CMDA. But coming back, I had to kind of learn some new ropes of leadership and some new ropes of my role here in leadership. I want to talk a little bit about that. And the Lord kind of gave me an image of this idea of learning the ropes, and particularly when it comes to the area of burnout. Or have you ever felt tangled up learning the ropes of leadership? Maybe you think about when maybe some of you are stepping into a new role right now. Or maybe you're in the same role, but the role is changing. And sometimes you just feel like this guy in the slide here, where you're just completely wrapped up and tangled in these kind of things. There's a learning curve with any job. And sometimes as those jobs change, as mine's changed even here in the last few months, there's another learning curve. I'm learning the ropes of leadership and learning the role. I'm learning the ropes of my job. I'm learning the ropes of my role, but I'm also learning the ropes of myself. What do I need to know about well-being, my own well-being? And I've learned some things through the years. I've been in full-time ministry now for almost 35 years. And I've learned a lot about myself, how to do some self-care, how to provide and take care of some things that I need to incorporate into my daily routines, my weekly routines, and how I can best take care of some self-care for myself. And so that's been helpful as I'm learning the ropes of leadership. Let's talk about this idea of this learning the ropes of leadership. Where does it come from? Well, ironically, when you look at this term, the ropes of leadership, it was a sailing term. As you can imagine, being on a ship in the military, there was a lot of different ropes. Ropes are used in a lot of different ways. And a new sailor, when they were added to the ship, had to learn the ropes. And there was all kinds of different stations there on the ship that they had to learn in order to be able to be proficient, to be able to work and do their part proficiently, and to be strong in what they were doing. And for the ship to sail in a good way, everyone had to know the ropes of leadership and had to know the ropes of sailing. And so this idea of the ropes of leadership is a sailing term. I don't know how many of you watch the program Friends. Joey's always saying, "How you doing? How you doing?" Kind of starts off any conversation with that question. We had a CMDA event here at the national headquarters about a year ago. And I ran into a doctor that I knew in the community. And so I walked up to him, I said, "How you doing?" And he said, "Great." And we chatted for a few moments and went about, had the banquet here at the CMDA. And later on that night, I got a text from this particular doctor, and he said, "Hey, do you got some time this week we could talk?" He said, I lied to you. I wrote back, I said, what do you mean you lied to me? He said, "Well, you asked me how I was doing. And I said it was great." He said, "I'm not doing well at all." He said, I'm struggling with burnout. I'm struggling with the pressures at work and all the changes that are taking place. And he said, "I feel like I'm at the burnout." And so we began to meet together. I began to coach him. I began to provide pastoral care to him. What was ironic, though, when I first sat down with this guy, this particular doctor, I said, "So you feel like you're ready to just walk away from it all?" And he said, "No, not really." I said, "Okay." And so you're ready to just do something else, a lot of changes? No, not necessarily. And what I began to ask myself was this question, is that, are there steps before burnout? Are there things that we should recognize or things that we should identify as moving us towards this stage of burnout. What we discovered with this person, this doctor who told me that he had lied to me, was he thought he was at burnout, but he wasn't. He was well on his way to burnout, but he wasn't quite there yet. Now, the good news to this story is because we were able to identify where he was at in the journey and where he was at in the burnout kind of scale of things, then he was certainly heavily fatigued in his job, and some necessary changes need to be made. And because I was able to do some coaching with him on how to make some adjustments in his schedule, he's come through that, not in burnout, but he's doing really, really well. And so we're really, really pleased with that. So what are the steps? What are the things that happen maybe before burnout? As you can see on this that, there's little stress at the beginning of the green zone, everything's going well. To the opposite side, there's a bit of a curve here on this slide. And then when you're heading towards burnout, the stress levels are in a dangerous zone. But notice what at the top of this scale, where kind of fatigue kind of sets in. It's kind of the top of I would almost call this a roller coaster. When you're heavy into fatigue from your job or heading towards burnout, there's this layer of fatigue, and it's kind of reached a peak, and then you're going to go into exhaustion and anxiety, and the overload of stress causes a lot of problems. And then we end up in a level of burnout. So the idea I want to talk about today is, how do we learn what are the steps before burnout? What happens before it? How do I notice where I'm going and what I'm heading to? So here's something I want you to look at. Learning the ropes of leadership is more than mastering a basic knowledge of your leadership role. And so when we think about the ropes of leadership, we think about these basic responsibilities or a basic knowledge of my role. What is your job as a healthcare provider? What is your job as a pastoral care provider for people within the healthcare system? And a lot of you have learned the basic knowledge of your role of leadership, but it also includes managing basic well-being skills to acknowledge the toll of leadership that it can have in your life. You notice those two things? They're two different things. Learning the ropes of leadership is not just about learning the basic knowledge of your role of leadership, but it also includes acknowledging the leadership toll that it can have on your life. And so if you're in a stage right now where you don't really feel like, if you're not acknowledging the toll that this role that you're in can have in your life, it can be a real challenge to you and can kind of head you down, move you over fatigue, and head you down the roller coaster of stress and struggle, and ultimately to burnout in your life. I put this slide in. I thought this was an interesting thing in American politics. This idea that leadership can take a toll in your life. I'm sure that if you look there at your own leadership, you look at people when our presidents came in, or your leadership prime ministers came in to a role of leadership, what they look like when they came in versus what they look like when they went out. You can see this stress that's taken, the toll that's taken on their leadership roles. The responsibilities that they carry can be stressful. I love this little image here. Who said being healthcare takes a toll? I'm 33 and I feel great, right? Well, he looks a little older than 33 years of age, but sometimes this stress and the toll that happens in us in healthcare can be challenging. And that's one of the reasons why I think mentoring is a tremendous aspect of healthcare and well-being. We need to really be focused more and more on helping healthcare professionals have a mentor. Or sometimes there's two roles here in mentoring that help. Number one is sometimes when you've been through challenges and been through fatigue and come out on the other end, you taking the time to mentor someone else and encourage them and to help them through the same things that you've been through, that can have a real strong healing process. When we help others with the ways that God has helped us through something, it can be powerful, but it can have incredible opportunity for people who are right in the midst of those stress points or heading towards burnout, and they're having a difficult time. So we talk a lot about mentoring here in the Center for Wellbeing. Leading can be like navigating through an advanced ropes course. And if you're struggling with fatigue in your life right now, you know that life can be difficult and it can be like going through a ropes course. Now, I have this image here of a brand new rope. This is something that was just taken, a picture that was taken of a brand new rope that you purchased at a store. I want you to notice a couple things about this rope as we talk about the learning and navigating through the ropes of leadership. One is that the rope appears to be new. You can tell it's never been used. You can tell has no wear and tear on this. This is a brand new rope. The second thing I want you to notice is that the rope is currently unused. It's perfectly structured. It's been purchased that way, has the perfect circles. You know, when you kind of rewind up that rope, once you've used it, it never looks that quite perfect except when it's brand new. Third thing is that the rope is not experiencing any tension or strain of any kind. Why? Because it's not being used. It's just a brand new rope that has never been touched. It's never been used. It's not being tied down. It's not being used. And then fourthly, that the rope is not fulfilling its purpose. There's no threat or stress or strain on this particular rope. Now, I think this is a kind of a thing that it's important for us to talk about, because I think sometimes we're surprised by some normal things that happen to us in healthcare and the area of stress. I mean, in my job, it's normal to have moments and seasons of stress and some moments of seasons of tension. When we're being used and when God's going to use us, there's going to be times where there's a lot of tension and some stress and strain and maybe even heading close to burnout. So I wanted to kind of, when I think about these ideas of learning the ropes of leadership, I wanted to put together 4 images of ropes that maybe help us identify this kind of process of what it looks like. So we don't end up like the doctor who says, I'm not doing very well, I'm at burnout, but not quite there. If we could identify a little bit earlier some of these images of ropes, they may help us internalize, okay, I've got a problem that I need to make some changes on. So I want to introduce to you 4 images that have helped me when I think about well-being, my own well-being, when I struggle about some stress and strain in my life. What are the 4 images I need to have? And so I want to encourage you with these today. Number 1, leadership tension. Leadership tension. Look at the rope there. It almost looks like this is one of those brand new ropes that's been kind of taken. And if you've ever been in a tug of war, you got multiple people on one end, you got someone else on the other end, and there's a little bit of a struggle. There's a little bit of a tension. There's pulling sometimes going on in different directions. There's not much lag in the rope there. There's a bit of tension. Okay, the rope loses full strength when it's being pulled in tension. But the pulling of this tension is the thing about tension is it's normal. The thing about tension, it's normal. Not all the time, not continuously, but ropes were designed to have some tension. If that rope was on the ship that we talked about in this navigating this in this tension of tying down a rope or a ship so that it doesn't float away, there's going to be some times where there's some lag in it, but there's also going to be some times when there's some tension, and that's normal. Okay. So one of the things that I want us to see is that sometimes people kind of begin to get stressed when they realize, okay, I got some tension in my life. Well, that'll be normal. I mean, as at the CMDA, we're heading to a season of a little bit of tension right now because we have our national meeting coming up next month, and there's so many things. We have a record number of people who are coming to our national meeting in Cincinnati, less than a month away. And so there's a lot of tension right now in getting everything done, and some of the challenges we've had working with the hotels and registrations and things like that. There's a little bit of tension, but that's okay because it's only going to last maybe about another month, and then we're going to have a great convention, and then life's going to go back to sometime a bit normal until the next thing comes up. So the first image I want you to see is this idea of leadership tension. The second image I want you to see is what I'm calling leadership strain. Leadership strain. It's not just tension. The tension's lasted long enough that it's starting to unravel a bit, starting to fray. The rope loses a little bit of strength because it's fraying a little bit. You can see the stress and the strain there. Strain and stress is what happens when you don't give attention to the tension over time. So remember I said tension is normal, and so that's not a bad thing. But when you don't give attention to the tension over time, prolonged tension leads to long-term stress, and it has some major impacts in your life. So in my life, I'm always looking for things that reduce strain, reduce tension. My wife and I, when I get home in the evenings, on weekends, she likes to watch television. We'll watch a show or something, and oftentimes I'll watch for a little bit, and then I'm like, I don't want to watch this anymore. And she'll be like, why? Why don't you want to watch it anymore? It's a great show. I'm like, well, I've got enough tension in my life right now. I don't need to be entertained by tension as well. And sometimes we have so many areas of tension in our life that sometimes it creates a strain because we're not dealing with the tension. It's prolonged. And so there's things that I do in my life, and I've learned this as I've learned the ropes of leadership, is what are the things that I can do to reduce tension? Maybe I can't reduce the tension that I face right now because of these deadlines and demands for our national meeting in less than a month. But what are some other things that maybe I'm adding to myself unnecessarily that is causing strain and causing the rope to be to unravel a bit and to cause some strain? So we talk about leadership tension, we talk about leadership strain, and now I want to talk about leadership fatigue. When I first started putting this talk together, I really thought this is what I was going to talk about, because the doctor I told you about at the beginning of the conversation here today, what we determined was he wasn't at burnout, but he was at leadership fatigue. And I really started thinking through how do we coach people through these times and seasons of leadership fatigue. And one of the things I thought was necessary is kind of having an image. What does this look like? Okay, this rope isn't broken yet, but it's clearly the strain has continued. The stress has been strong enough, and the tension on the rope has gotten to the point it's frayed considerably, and it's just barely hanging on by a thread. If this was still tied down, it would still hold, but you know that something's about to happen. Fatigue is a feeling of constant tiredness or weakness, and can be physical, mental, a combination of both. And so what I like to do is talk about mileage without regular maintenance is dangerous. When you have in your vehicle, when you run it all the time and you're not following the dash lights, when the dash lights comes on and says change oil or leak in a tire, or there's an inflated tire that's deflated, when you're not watching the warning lights on your dashboard and you just keep on driving. My own daughter, she has struggles with this. She's not a mechanic, obviously, and she'll come to me and she said, "Dad, the engine light came on in my car. What's the light? I don't know. It's low air pressure, or check engine light has come on." And I'll say, "Well, how long has that been on?" And she'll say, "Well, I don't know, months." I'll say, "Honey, that's not going to be good. I mean, the longer you go ignoring the dash lights, the fatigue just gets stronger and stronger, and that strain keeps pulling and pulling, and eventually you're stranded on the side of the road because your engine can't keep going, and your body is the same way." When it comes to leadership fatigue, sustained leadership fatigue is unsustainable in the long haul. And you need to understand that sustained leadership fatigue is unsustainable in the long haul. When we feel tired, exhausted, discouraged in our leadership journey, when we feel depleted, when we feel down, when we feel drained, you cannot sustain that for long periods of time. It's unsustainable. J. Oswald Sanders says fatigue is the price of leadership. Mediocrity is the price of never getting tired. And so fatigue is part of the leadership journey, and something we have to understand as one of the things as we look at these images: leadership tension, leadership strain, leadership fatigue, and then the next one. But let's look at this verse of scripture, Galatians 6, 9, and 10 out of the Message. Eugene Peterson says this: "So let's not allow ourselves to get fatigued doing good. At the right time, we will harvest a good crop if we don't give up or quit. Right now, therefore, every time we get to the chance, let us work for the benefit of all, starting with the people closest to us in the community of faith." Now, I love that line, that first line. Let's not allow ourselves to get fatigued. Some translations will say, let us not become weary in well-doing. And maybe that's where you're at as you look at this burnout scale. You've moved beyond fatigue, you've moved beyond tension, you've moved beyond the stress. And as you look at yourself, you see, hey, I need to strengthen this rope. I'm allowing myself to get fatigued in the process of doing a lot of good in the healthcare world. So what's the last image? We've talked about the tension, we've talked about the stress, the strain, we've talked about the fatigue, but now let's talk about actual burnout. And in burnout, the rope is actually broken. Okay, it's you've not gotten help, you've not reversed some of the directional challenges, you've not reached out to anyone, and so now you're just broken. The rope is completely broken, and you can hardly function in the role and responsibilities you have. Someone said burnout is what happens when you try to avoid being human for too long. And oftentimes that's the case. We just think, okay, well, I'm not like these other people. I'm strong in what I do, and I can keep going. I can keep this happening. And so the classic triad of burnout is these three things: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and a loss of sense of personal accomplishment. And when these things begin to happen, when you begin to notice these classic triad, then you are heading towards burnout. The same triad can also be called the red flag. Okay, and we talked about this in the Center for Wellbeing. We've taken that classic triad model to use it in this red acronym. The R stands for your reduced fulfillment, E stands for emotional exhaustion, and D stands for depersonalization. And so when these three things are happening, so if you can't look at the image and say, okay, well, mine's broken, but you can understand that in your role and in your family and the things that are most important to you in your job, in your calling, if there's a reduced sense of fulfillment, if there's this complete sense of exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, and depersonalization, it's almost like you're looking at it from another vantage point. You're no longer involved. You're just checked out. Then you're in burnout. So let me give you a couple warnings about these four ropes. Okay, you need to watch out if your time in any of these stages are prolonged. If you get stuck in any of these four stages, like I said, tension is normal. No, don't be thrown off by you're facing some tension. You don't need to think things are falling apart because you're facing tension. That's normal. But that prolonged season of tension, or when you're stuck in that, when it continues to pull on and fray the rope, then that can be dangerous. The second thing is when you're progressing, advancing through these stages. Okay, so there's some tension, but then now there's strain, now there's fatigue, and you're keeping the tension on the rope, and you're not dealing with it, you're not getting help, then it's probably going to lead to the complete breakout and breakdown. And thirdly, you're procrastinating to get some help. It's going to be problematic. Okay, so in times of tension, realize it's normal, but continue prolonged stress on that, it's going to cause problems. You need to understand this has been a season of prolonged tension, and I need to reach out for some help. I need to get some coaching. I need to get some pastoral care. I need to get some help for me, or I need to take a vacation. I need to take some time away and get someone to come alongside and help me. And so I want to talk about some recommendations in just a little bit of our time together for how you can learn the ropes. If you've identified yourself, and I really want you to think about which picture of these ropes of leadership best describe you: the tension, the strain, the fatigue, or the burnout. So here's a couple things. Number one, that will be helpful to us as some advice. Recognize reality. What's the reality here in this particular situation? Sometimes we think things are better than they actually are, but what are the realities? You need to be aware when you need inspiration, and you also need to be aware when you need intervention, right? The inspiration, maybe you need someone to give you a pep talk or a resiliency talk, and sometimes you need just some inspiration, but there are times when you need an intervention. You need some 911 help. And so here's a couple tips to help you, some questions you could ask yourself to help you recognize reality. One is, where would you identify yourself in these 4 pictures? Where would you identify yourself if you were being honest? Okay. Number 2, where would your family identify you in these stages? If you were to ask your spouse or your kids, what would they say? I mean, you're saying, hey, I'm great. I'm not near burnout. Would they agree with that? And then where would your trusted coworkers place you in these stages? The people who are closest to you, the people that see you snap at them, the people that see you stressed and unhappy, where would they see you? So first encouragement is to recognize reality. The second one is reach out for help. Don't try to do this all by yourself. Again, be honest. And you're not a weak leader if you need some help. There's nothing wrong with you if, because you've given and given and given, and you need someone to pour into you. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't go through this cyclone all alone, because sometimes the enemy tries to convince us that the thing you need to do is you don't need to talk to anyone. You don't need to get help. You just need to carry this load all by yourself. And so I'm encouraging you to reach out for help. Phone a friend, talk to a pastor, reach out to a colleague, get some coaching from someone. Don't procrastinate to eliminate these issues that are causing problems. I coach a young leader every other week here at the CMDA who owns as a business owner. He's not in the healthcare profession, but he supports our ministry here. And he called me up one day and he said, hey, I want to get some coaching. And I said, what do you want to get coaching on? He said, I want to get coaching on God Owns My Business. And I said, okay. He wanted to honor God. And so he supports the ministry of CMDA through his business. So we get on Zoom for the first coaching conversation. And he says to me, I said, what do you want to talk about? And that's what happens in coaching, assuming he was going to talk about the God Owns My Business. And what I discovered was, he said, hey, I want to talk about that, but I want to talk about me first. Okay, what do you want to talk about? I said, well, I got out of the military a few years ago. I was in Afghanistan. And he said, I was one of the only few soldiers that came home from my unit. And he said, I just came home and I jumped into life and I never really dealt with any of the things that happened to me and it's causing problems right now. And I just need some help. And we've been able to give him some help. We've been able to get him some help, both some counseling and some coaching for what he was going on. Why? Because he recognized reality, recognized things weren't going very well. And he was willing to reach out for help. Notice this at the end of the rope. Someone once said, when you come to the end of the rope, tie a knot and hang on, right? And by the way, that has to be the dumbest piece of advice I've ever heard in my life, right? Because have you ever hung on to a rope for a while? The idea of just hanging on to the rope isn't going to be helpful. You need to call for help. You need to get some help. So we need to move beyond that. The third one, piece of advice is release your burdens, okay? James 5 verse 13 says, if any among you in trouble, let him pray. Is anyone happy? Let him sing songs of praise. The Greek word here for trouble means distress, affliction, suffering, great anxiety. So what do we do with those times and seasons of anxiety? We have to, spiritually, we have to give those to the Lord. We have to trust the Lord to help us through those. The fourth one is reevaluate your responsibilities and priorities. If it's possible, sometimes it's not always, sometimes we need to reshuffle. Sometimes we need to readjust. I serve on several boards. On 2 of the boards that I serve on, I am the moderator or the chairman of the board. I've been through a lot of struggles and stress this past year on one of the boards that I serve on. I had to fire the president of our denomination for some behavior. It's been a challenging, he was a narcissist and had to fire him. And it's brought a lot of stress and strain in my life. About 6 months ago, when the CMDA, our CEO, Dr. Mike Chupp, came to me and asked me to take on some new responsibilities, I knew that they would be increased responsibilities on my workload. And I needed to kind of reevaluate the load that I was carrying. And I got some coaching on it. I talked to my wife about it. And one of the things we decided was I would fulfill my term that ends in July this year. And then I would not run again for this position. And it was hard because if I would run, I would likely get reelected. I think we've done a lot of good to help the denomination that I'm a part of. But I knew that I needed to reevaluate. I needed to restructure. I needed to kind of make some changes in my life so that I could carry out the responsibilities I have. I probably couldn't keep on going, carrying the things I was carrying and all the other new responsibilities. So that was a way to help and recharge. The next one is to recharge and to restore, to refuel. All of us are familiar with electronics, right? Every day we're used with this idea of I've got to recharge. I got to take my phone. I can use it, but I need to recharge it. And when I don't recharge it, then the battery gets so low that it's unusable and it can't perform its function. And neither can you if you're not refueling, repairing, and replenishing yourself. The sixth one is rediscover joy. Rediscover joy. One of the things that happens in the burnout when the road breaks is that we lose a sense of joy. And one of the ways we regain and repair our well-being is by rediscovering joy. What brings you joy? What brings back joy in your life? Right now, I'm looking in my office here at the CMDA. I have a picture frame my wife bought me for Christmas, and we load pictures of our family, my wife and I. We have a brand new grandson. He's about a year and a half old, and we were just up there this past weekend. And I can be in a very stressful situation, and I can look across my office into my picture frame right now and see a picture of me and my grandson, and it just brings joy. One of the things I love to do is take off a weekend. We were up there last weekend in Kentucky, and spending time with my grandson, no matter what kind of stress and strain, it's a place of joy for me, in a way that I can enjoy being with my grandson. So we got to rediscover joy in our life. What are the things that brings joy to your life, and get in touch with those? Sometimes it may be a hobby that you do. It's something that you do that's activities. Maybe I talked to some of our doctors who love working in the yard and gardening or painting, or something that they do that is outside of their regular workforce, what they do, and they just love doing it. It brings them great joy. And then the last thing is repeat the process all over again. And so as you go through life, as you go through learning the ropes of leadership, there'll be seasons where we have to go through this over and over and over again. So let me ask you this question one more time. How are you doing? How are you doing? Which image best describes you? And the question is, seriously, don't tell me something that you're just doing okay, but tell me if you're struggling, where you're at, what you're doing. Have an honest moment with yourself, and let's get help. Scripture says in Psalm 121, verse 1 and 2, I lift mine eyes to the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. So when we're struggling, we need the help of the Lord.